Thank you all for your thoughtful responses and introductions. So without further ado, I'll introduce our speaker for tonight. Nicholas Christakis is a social scientist and physician at Yale University who conducts research in the fields of network science, biosocial science, and behavior genetics. His current work focuses on how human biology and health affect and are affected by social interactions and social networks. He directs the Human Nature Lab and is the co-director of the Yale Institute for Network Science. He is the Sterling Professor of Social and Natural Science, appointed in the departments of Sociology, Medicine, Ecology and Evolutionary Biology, Biomedical Engineering, and the School of Management. Dr. Christakis received his BS from Yale in 1984, his MD from Harvard Medical School, and his MPH from the Harvard School of Public Health in 1989, and his PhD from the University of Pennsylvania in 1995. He was elected to the National Academy of Medicine in 2006, the American Association for the Advancement of Science in 2010, and the American Academy of Arts and Sciences in 2017. One body of work in his lab focuses on how health and health behavior in one person can influence analogous outcomes in a person's social network. This work involves the application of statistical and mathematical models to understand the dynamics of diverse phenomena in longitudinally evolving networks. A related body of work uses experiments to examine the spread of altruism, emotions, and health behaviors along network connections online and offline, including with large-scale field trials in the developing world directed at improving public health, example in Honduras and India. His lab has also examined the genetic and evolutionary determinants of social network structure, showing that social interactions have shaped our genome, with related projects that have mapped networks of populations in Tanzania and Sudan who live as all humans did 10,000 years ago. His most recent work has used artificial intelligence agents, bots, to affect social processes online. Dr. Christakis is the author of over 200 articles and several books. His influential book, Connected, the surprising power of our social networks and how they shape our lives, documented how social networks affect our lives and was translated into 20 foreign languages. His most recent book, Blueprint, The Evolutionary Origins of a Good Society, was published in March 2019 and is slated to appear in German, Chinese, Dutch, and Greek and other languages. In 2009, Christakis was named by Time magazine to their annual list of the 100 most influential people in the world. In 2009 and in 2010, he was listed by Foreign Policy magazine in their annual list of top 100 global thinkers. Ladies and gentlemen, Nicholas Christakis.
Thank you so much for having me to this group of people whose variety was very impressive and interesting to me in this wonderful setting, and I had a nice time already talking with Shmuley, who I took an instant liking to. And by the way, that's an interesting topic in itself. What are the evolutionary origins of like at first sight? It's not hard to construct an argument for why we're capable of love at first sight. When I say that, I mean reciprocated love at first sight, not the kind of infatuation many of us had in high school where we were in love with someone and they had no idea who we were. No, I'm talking about love at first sight, where you fall in love with someone and they fall in love with you, which is uncommon human experience. It's not required for a happy marriage, although it often foretells it. But it's not hard to construct an evolutionary argument for why we might evolve the capacity for love at first sight. That is to say, the capacity to identify a mate that would enhance our survival and the survival of our children. So that phenotype, that ability that we have to have love at first sight, which is uncommon, but which does exist, it's not hard to construct an argument for why you would be able to discern, this is a person I should reproduce with because our children are more likely to survive. However, we also have the capacity for like at first sight, which all of us have had that experience. Why? Why do we have the capacity for like at first sight? That's a very unusual phenotype that we have. When you meet someone and you instantly like them, usually that foretells a good, it's not perfectly predictive. All of us have had the experience of really liking someone and then later on concluding what a jerk they are. And we've also had the experience of thinking that guy's a real jerk, and then later, I came to like you. But we have this capacity, and so why is that? Well, it's very interesting why we evolved the capacity for friendship. Friendship, the definition of friendship, the one we've advanced, or that's in the book Blueprint. By the way, I have a more recent book called Apollo's Arrow, the profound and enduring impact of coronavirus on the way we live. We evolved the capacity for friendship, which is that we have long-term, non-reproductive unions with unrelated conspecifics. You have a friend. And it's very rare in the animal kingdom. We do it. Certain other primates do it. Elephants, both Asian and African elephants do it, and certain whale species do it. And that's it. Now, when you think of social connections, for example, in packs of dogs or horses, those animals are typically genetically related to each other. They're cousins, for example. But we will truly have friends with unrelated individuals, and they can last a very long time. Oh, I can answer the question of how long your friendships last, because we've studied that too. So why? Why would natural selection have endowed us with this very profound capacity? And in the book Blueprint that Matthew mentioned, The Evolutionary Origins of a Good Society, I talk about these evolved capacities we have, which are extraordinary. We have a capacity for love. We don't just have sex with each other, but we form a sentimental attachment to the people that we are having sex with. That's uncommon in the animal kingdom, that you have a long-term sentimental, so far as we know in the animals, we can't really know that, attachment or a particular attachment to a person. We have friendships, which is very rare, as I've said. We cooperate with each other, which is also rare. We teach each other things, which is really rare. Animals, most animals, virtually all animals, can learn through what is known as independent learning or contact with the environment. A little fish can learn that if it swims up to the light, it will find food there. That's called independent learning. All the experiments you guys did in high school biology with shocking the worm and it learns to avoid the electrical plate and so on. But we don't just learn by independent learning. We also learn by something called social learning. So for example, you put your hand in the fire and you learn that it burns. Now, you've acquired some knowledge, fire burns, but you paid a price, you have a burnt hand. Or I can watch you put your hand in the fire, and I acquire almost as much knowledge that fire burns, and I pay none of the price. So social learning is incredibly efficient. The ability to watch others and learn from there is super efficient. And that social learning is rare in the animal kingdom. It's not, many animals learn socially. We're one of them. Or, for example, we go into the forest and you eat red berries and die. And I'm like, I better not eat red berries. That is a real survival advantage, to be able to learn socially from other members of our other conspecifics. But we don't just learn from each other, we teach each other things. I teach you to build a fire. And this is exceptionally rare in the animal kingdom. And yet it is a fundamental part of our humanity. And incidentally, what our university should be doing, which is another whole topic. But we teach each other things. So all of these capacities, the capacity for love, the capacity for friendship, the capacity for cooperation, the capacity for teaching, these have all been shaped by our evolutionary past and are very deep and fundamental parts of our humanity. And I would say are predicates or illustrations of a good society. And in the book Blueprint, I talk a little bit about a certain moral philosophy tradition about how we can even come to say anything is good at all, actually, which is itself a kind of interesting topic. And here I rely very much on some of Philippa Foot's arguments. I would, hold on, what was I going to say about a good society? Oh, and so I think one of the things that's sort of really interesting is that you can begin, if you begin to think of where our society is heading and what our societies are doing. There's an argument I'm sure you're all familiar with that Steven Pinker and others have advanced about how the world is getting better. And I think Steven, who's a friend of mine, is right about this. And the essential portion of the argument is that beginning with the Enlightenment in the 18th century and the philosophical innovations that took place then, a kind of commitment to democracy, a commitment to reason, a commitment to science, unevenly applied and unequally applied and unevenly distributed throughout the world across time. But certainly the initial commitments were well articulated and came to be applied more and more, that the promulgation of those principles and the dissemination of those principles, coupled with the parallel innovations in science, there's discoveries about electricity and magnetism and gravity and the steam engine and all of those things, that these philosophical advances and these scientific advances, starting in England initially and spreading around the world, have contributed to a dramatic improvement in human social welfare, that we are safer, more peaceful, healthier, live longer, richer than we otherwise would have been. And I think that argument, in my view, is empirically correct. But what I have tried to do in the book Blueprint is to argue that we need not rely solely on historical forces to understand the origins of a good society. The deeper, more powerful, more ancient factors and forces are at work propelling a good society over hundreds of thousands of years. That natural selection has equipped us, has endowed us with these fundamental virtues that you all take for granted, love, friendship, teaching, cooperation, and so on, that form or undergird a good society. And so the essential argument that I would make is that the arc of our evolutionary history is long, but it bends towards goodness. And that book was animated in part as well by a kind of personality or moral disposition I have, which is that fundamentally I'm an optimist. My wife is very irritated by this property, and she would say that she's a realist, and I'm an unnatural optimist. But I'm fundamentally optimistic about human beings, and I fundamentally marvel at us. And by the way, I should say that I'm not unaware of our capacity for great evil, right? I mean, every century is replete with horrors. The pogroms and the slavery and the torture and the violence and the warfare. You can find it everywhere. But equally, we are good, actually. And I would argue that if every time I came near you, you were violent towards me, or you killed me, or you took my stuff, or you filled me with lies, that I would be better off living apart from you. We would have evolved not to be a social species. We would have evolved to live atomistically. Many species do live atomistically. We do not. To my eye, that means that the benefits of a connected life must have outweighed the costs. That whatever the risks I run in assembling into a group, the benefits of that groupiness must outweigh the costs of that groupiness. So even though we have all of these vices, which we do, I would argue that the virtues, and particularly the social virtues, surmount them. In fact, I would argue that many of the virtues that we have, not all of them, but many of them, are intrinsically social virtues. So we don't care whether you love yourself, or are kind to yourself, or are just to yourself. We care whether you love others, or are kind to others, or are just to others, right? These virtues are intrinsically social. Now, you can have some virtues, like bravery, for example. You can be brave before nature, right? In an earthquake, for instance, or facing a violent animal, for example. And bravery is a virtue. But many of our virtues are social. And again, I think there's a deep connection between our evolutionary past and our moral existence, I would argue. In fact, I see the book Blueprint as a work of evolutionary sociology, or what I would call sociodicy. So many of you are familiar with the notion of theodicy, right? This is a Catholic tradition. How are we? And I don't know what the Jewish tradition is on this. They have also, as well. Like, how are we to make sense? If God is omniscient and omnipotent and beneficent, Jewish God is not quite as beneficent sometimes, I think. I mean, yes, I know, technically same God. I know. I'm joking a little. But how are we to make sense of all the evil in the world? How could such a God do this? And and this is known as a problem of theodicy. How are we to vindicate a belief in the goodness and omnipotence of God if given the evil we see in the world? And I would argue that by analogy, you can think of sociodicy. How can we vindicate a belief and confidence in the goodness of society, given all the manifest evil and problems that we see in the world, like this extraordinary event? So that's sort of what I tackle in Blueprint. Now, when I was invited to this event, I was desperate for guidance, and I was given a lot of, we just want you to talk. It's very informal. It's a salon. And they're like, well, they would like to hear about your biography. And I was like, are you sure? And there's that scene, which none of you will know, but maybe Shmuley will know about in the Philadelphia Story, where Katharine Hepburn goes, "We're going to talk about me, goody." Obviously I could tell you a reasonably story-filled, and I hope interesting. I will tell you how I met my wife, which is one of my favorite stories, because she is my best friend. And I'm very lucky that way. And it's what I wanted in my own marriage. And you don't need to have that, by the way. You're entitled to have different models of marriage, and you're entitled not to want your partner to be your best friend, and you get different things from your partner, you get from your friends. It's all true. But in my case, she's my best friend. So I didn't know whether to do that. So you'll have to give me some guidance about what kind of autobiography you want, and I'm happy to be disinhibited and tell you whatever you want to hear. And I also have 10 or 12 little notes about friendship that I could tell you about listening to your points. So I could talk to you about friendship all you wanted. What would you like to hear about? Yeah? And we can talk a little bit about the Silliman events, although I want to say something about that. This will sound immodest, but...
How did this happen?
How did what happen?
This.
Well, I'll tell you about that in a minute then. Okay, but the Silliman events, so just say...
We want the real.
All right, I'll tell you what I can about myself. But what's very odd, I no longer feel uncomfortable when people mention it. It's just part of my history, and I think I handled myself well. It was difficult. It was very difficult, and my wife and I, every night we talked, what should we do, what should we do? And we had to resist. It's like the Obama said, when they go low, we go high. And like every night we were trying to do that. And I just have to say, though, and this is going to sound a little immodest, I was a reasonably famous scientist before that happened. And I think I am one of the most cited social scientists in the world. And so I kind of hate it when I'm introduced as, the guy who kept his cool in the courtyard with a bunch of undergraduates who just lost their noodles, So I was able to keep my cool in the courtyard for a number of reasons. One was that I had martial arts training for decades, Shotokan karate, which is a magnificent style, and Shotokan karate, a magnificent style, and I had a magnificent teacher, Kazumi Tabata, here at Yale initially, and then I trained with him afterwards when I went to medical school, and that was extremely helpful. And I had been a hospice doctor taking care of people who were dying for a very long time. So I was used to high emotional intensity circumstances, and that skill was extremely helpful in that situation. I had studied something called de-individuation, which is how people become part of a mob. Why, for example, torturers will wear masks or will mask their victim to de-individuate them, or why people in those old sort of sexually licentious balls, masked balls were sexually licentious, right? You de-individuate, you see yourself, or how mobs come to do these incredibly violent things. They lose their moral self-identity. They see their victims not as people and themselves not as moral actors. And I saw that happening in the courtyard. Like I literally saw it happening in front of me. So I had everything, so many aspects of my life were moving through my head in that moment, and I was trying to figure out what to do. Plus, I had committed myself to a life as a teacher, and so I saw this as an opportunity to teach them something, which I tried to do, and I think the lesson was lost on virtually everyone in the courtyard. Yeah. I would say, yeah. You can see it in the videos. They didn't understand what was happening, or maybe they did, but they were like the Cultural Revolution. We're just interested in raw power. It's very weird for me to but it's part of my history, and so it's unavoidable. And I'm happy to talk more about that if you want. I was going to say one thing about either the hospice or the karate. The very nicest thing that was ever said to me after this. I met a very interesting man, older than me, and I've been blessed to have some friends. One of my advisors, she just died. She was 93, so she was 30 years older than me, and she was a friend. And I've had some male friends, mostly mentors actually, who are 20 or 30 years older. And something very nice about someone that's that much older than you, because there's not much competition in the relationship, and it's very helpful. I met this older man in a setting I won't go into after the events, a very wealthy man, and he was very curious, and I was happy to oblige him and tell him all the backstory. And what the deans at Yale did and didn't do, and frankly, they didn't do very much at all. And they, abrogated their duties as far as I'm concerned. And he listened to my story, and then he said to me, and this was the very nicest thing anyone had said to me about these events. He said to me, "This was not the first time you've been tested, is it?" Ooh. Extraordinary praise, wasn't it? I was so amazed when he said that to me, and so grateful. Here I am telling you this 10 years later, and I said to him, "No, you're right. It's not." And in fact, those events, bad as they were not even in the top 5 worst events of my life. So I think there's something about having faced adversity which is maturing and growing. And I don't think you can live a life without adversity. I'm not sure you might want to live a life without adversity, I don't know. But the ancient Greeks said pathemathos, which means through suffering comes knowledge. And so that was at play in the courtyard too,
Maybe that answers your first question of the night,
which is what?
about how a god could have created a world.
Yeah, pathemathos, yes, that's right. And the Hindus also have a similar belief, that you're sampling, and the Buddhists, that you're sampling multiple lives, that you get to see the good and the bad, possibly.
Without the adversity, we wouldn't be here we are.
I would say. So Shmuley is pushing me for biography. I don't know where to start. Should I? I'll start briefly. I'll tell you just some highlights. Is that interesting to you guys?
Keep going.
So my parents immigrated from Greece as Fulbright scholars in the late 50s. They were both very bright Greeks. My mother's father both of my grandfathers were extraordinary men. My mother's father saw fit to educate his daughter. They were upper class. For a man of his era and his gender, he grew up in poverty. Both of my grandfathers grew up in poverty when they were born, and they were both self-made men. And my mother's father immigrated from southern Greece to Istanbul, where there were the opportunities there, and they actually hung out with the Jews and the Armenians. They paid the infidel tax to the government, and the Orthodox, the Greeks, the Armenians, and the Jews, and but he saw fit to educate his daughters, which was really unusual. And he sent my mother to the United States, which was really unusual in the 1950s. And she winds up at Vassar. And through the Greek community, they are introduced and they meet and they fall in love. And I'm one of the issues of that. So my parents had 3 children and then adopted 2 more later in life. And which is, I don't know how well that factors. So I have a black sister and a Chinese brother. So I grew up in an interracial family as well, which my black sister was calling me up in 2015 saying, "What the fuck is going on over there?" And I was like, "Nora, I have no idea. These people have gone crazy." But anyway, my father was actually a student both my parents were PhD students at Yale. My father in nuclear physics and my mother in physical chemistry. And I was born in New Haven at the Yale New Haven Hospital. I had one of those T-shirts that says Yale class of 19 ? A little onesie as a baby. And then 22 years later, that came to pass. And then my parents had to return to Greece in 1965. So I was born in 1962. And my father had just gotten his PhD in nuclear physics, but because he had military deferments, the Greek army saw fit to draft him into the army in 1965. So he was about, how old would he have been? He was, 24 or something, or 25. They draft him to the army. He has a PhD in nuclear physics from Yale. This is 1965. And they decide, the Greek army in its infinite wisdom, how should we deploy this man? And they decide simply because he could read or write, they would make him a dentist's assistant. So my father's military service can you imagine a Greek army dentist in the 1960s? I mean, it must have been awful. And anyway, his job was to hold down the other soldiers while they were being dealt with by this Greek dentist. Anyway, they were there for a few years and they returned to the United States in 68. I come back in 68. I don't speak any English. I only speak Greek. In the interval, my other 2 siblings have been born. And my mother is diagnosed with a terminal illness in 1968 when I'm 6. She was 25 at the time. So she had what was now a more treatable disease, but was then a fatal disease. So she had a Hodgkin's disease, stage 4B, nodular sclerosing type. And we were sent to say our goodbyes to her. And Vince DeVita, who was at Yale eventually, had just invented MOP, this chemotherapy treatment. And her doctor had heard about it and gave her a partial regimen, and she miraculously had a 7-year remission. She eventually dies when I'm 25 and she's 47, and she was one of the most extraordinary human beings I've ever met in my life. In fact, I think my going into hospice medicine was a counterphobic reaction to growing up in a family where I was just constantly worried my mother was going to die. Any day she was going to die. So I grew up with this uncertainty, with this sword of Damocles over my head. And my first body of work was on prognostication, how doctors make predictions, because I grew up obsessed with predicting how long would she live. So she gets this remission. So I grew up in this household with an extraordinary human being. She's the kind of person who would get chemotherapy and come home and bake for us. You know, her children, her 3 little children. She would cook for us and then go upstairs and vomit for the rest of the evening. You know, just extraordinary and brave like a samurai before death. I mean, I've never met a more fearless person in front of death. And I took care of thousands of people who were dying later in my career, and I was at the bedside of hundreds when they died. Like, I witnessed at least 200 or 300 deaths. And I never met, except one woman I met who reminded me of my mother, a woman dying of scleroderma at the hospital at the University of Pennsylvania in the early 1990s. She was extraordinary. And I'm sure part of my going into hospice medicine was to see, well, who else was like that? So my mother was fearless in the face of death, didn't want to die, but extraordinarily unafraid. And I remember asking her how this was possible when by then I was in medical school, at Harvard Medical School. And she says, what you don't understand, Nicholas, is that you're young and healthy, and a dying person wants to die like a sleepy person wants to sleep. Imagine you're just exhausted, and all you want to do is go to bed. That's how I feel. So fearless like a samurai, very wise, very loving. I miss her still. Anyway, that's how I grew up. And then when I was 16, my father, as was typical of men of his ethnic background and as typical of the 70s, left our family, left our household. He was a brilliant man. I have good relationships with him now, but it was not very helpful. So at the age of 16, I was sort of the oldest sibling and had a lot of responsibility for helping my younger siblings. In the interval, my older brother, Kwon Yun, had been adopted, and Kwon Yun is now a very famous surgeon at UCSF. He's the vice chief of surgery there. He's a famous endocrine surgeon. But he had gone, also he went to Yale. He had left the house by then, by the time I was 16, because he's 8 years older than me. And then I come to Yale at the age of, I just turned 17, because when we came back from Greece, I skipped a year. And this was, I was very nerdy and brainy and very interested in self-improvement from a young age. And I was very interested in science, and I was very interested in, but my initial love was linguistics, because I was interested in semiotics. I came to Yale and I wanted to be, I wanted to study semiotics, I wanted to study linguistics, but, and I took some classes. In fact, I was telling Danielle and Matthew when we came over here, my professor was Leopold Pospischel, who had the house next door. And I remember once coming to his house and being very smitten with a graduate student who was one of his graduate students who had this extraordinary, she had swishy skirts and silver bracelets, and I was this like 18-year-old dweeby kid. She was a grown woman, she had, she had no interest in me, of course. Anyway, so I wanted to do that, but I was afraid. I was afraid to study that, and I knew I wanted to go to medical school because all my mother's sons became doctors. Every single one of the 3 of us became doctors. And so, and what was very interesting to me about that, and I tell a lot of my students now, is that when you are a Yale undergrad, if you say, there's certain things you can say you want to do, and nobody questions you. So if you say, I want to go to medical school, well, that's great. And if you get into Harvard Medical School, people say, good for you, right? Of course. Or if you say, I want to teach for America, people, oh, that's great. Or work at Goldman Sachs, that's great. Or McKinsey, that's great, right? People, there are these like, high, but that's so stupid, right? I never questioned why I wanted to, it was again it was like addressing my past. I was a prisoner to my past, and there's nothing wrong about being a doctor. I'll come to that in a moment, but nobody stopped me to say, why are you becoming a doctor? Are you sure you want to be a doctor, right? I mean, nobody, not a single person. So because I wanted to be a doctor, I sort of abandoned my interest in linguistics and very timidly did biology instead. And I majored in biology. And I went on to medical school. And then my mother was then dying the second year of my medical school. And so I decided to, finally was dying, and she was 47. I was 25. And I had taken actually a year off in college, believe it or not, to go work in a French virology lab where I studied coronavirus. It's another whole story I can tell you later how that. So I spent a year in France.
It wasn't a Chinese lab, was it?
No, it wasn't. No, it was not. And there was no escape of the coronavirus when we were there. We had very good behavior. Actually, I'll tell you just as a digression on the story and help me come back to my main story. So at the time, there was no internet, so there was no real way to figure out who was who. And I was working at the marine biology lab at Woods Hole in a cellular neuroanatomy lab at the time with a very wonderful scientist by the name of Tom Rees. And I was working as a darkroom technician. That was my day job, like earning my pay by being a darkroom technician. But in the night, we would do experiments. And we worked 80 or 90 or 100 hours a week. I mean, the machines, these multi-million-dollar machines, these electron microscopes and these freeze fracture devices were in operation 24 hours a day. You would sign up for microscope time at 2 in the morning. So we were doing these experiments all the time. And I was desperate to get a job. I wanted to take a year off from college. And through serendipity, I met this French virologist because he was visiting some neighbors of ours from the home where I grew up in. And he said, oh, we'll hire you. And the reason he wanted to hire me was because I spoke English and they wanted help in translating their papers. That was the only marketable skill I had at the age of 20 is that I spoke English. And that's actually still true of most of the undergrads or anyone. I mean, when you're 20, I mean, they're very smart, but I mean, Jesus, they can't do anything, or very rarely can. And so finally, the job offer comes from this guy, and I get the letter when I was at Woods Hole on Cape Cod, and my postdoc advisor, I was 20, he was 30, says, well, let's go look this guy up. George Perias was his name. So we go to the library, because there was no internet, and look and did a literature search and pulled the guy's papers off. And he was studying rotavirus and coronavirus. He was studying all these viruses that are enzootic, that live in animals, in their guts, and then can spread to humans. And they were reading the papers, and in the papers it says, research assistants were dispatched to the streets of Paris to collect dog feces from the streets, which was a big problem back then, and less so now, and bring them back to the lab where they were processed in this way, and we extracted the coronavirus and so on. And so my postdoc said to me, this is going to be your job, not translating English, but collecting dog shit on the streets of Paris. And he was right. When I got to Paris, they gave me these little titanium pooper scooper, and they said, okay, now go out. This was at the Hôpital Saint-Louis in the 12th arrondissement, and they said, go out and collect the poop and bring it back to the lab, and here's how you process it when you bring it back. Honest to God. And I did that, and other things too. Anyway.
Did you have to taste it first?
No, I didn't.
Make sure it's dog poop, not cat
Yeah,
poop.
exactly. You could see, yes, exactly. Anyway, this was a digression going back. Oh, so I took a year off in medical school as well to get my MP8. I thought I can't care for my mother who's dying if I'm doing clinical rotations, so I should take a break and do a Master of Public Health degree, which is much easier, much controllable. So I took that year off thinking that I would be flying back and forth from DC, but my mother wound up dying in September. All the children had gone home, and she said, I haven't told this story before, but I'll tell it now. We were all sitting in her room. She was about to die. It was like, we didn't know this, but she was 2 or 3 weeks out from death. It was like early September. She died in the 3rd week of September. And she looked at us and she goes, it's time for me to die. She goes, you children need to go back to school. Can you imagine? She was right, of course. And she didn't have much long to live anyway. And she did. She died like two weeks later. And my sister Katrina and my brother Dimitri and I and Kwon Yun, who had come in, he was a surgeon then at UCSF, we all went back to our work. Anyway, so I had taken the year off to do my MPH, but I didn't need it because she died in September. But it was during that year, partly, I think, disinhibited by her death, and maybe ennobled a little bit, or not ennobled, but encouraged or set free a little bit by it, I sort of rediscovered my interest in the social sciences, because I was taking an MPH degree, we were studying biostatistics, we were studying human behavior, we were studying all of these ideas. And I was like, I like this stuff, and why don't I do this instead of what I was planning to do? In the interval, I had met my wife, who, and I'll tell you the story because it's one of my favorite stories, and I've told this story before, but the thing you need to know about my beloved Erica is that she has a bona fide psychiatric disorder, which she's afraid of snakes. It's like a phobia. And so some of you probably have phobias of heights or snakes or caves or whatever you have, or whatever. And that's a general anxiety disorder. It has a partially genetic basis. It's actually extremely treatable. It's the only psychiatric condition that you can be cured of, basically through exposure therapy. And
Snakes in particular?
no, all of them. So heights, snakes, all of them. All of the phobias are a subcategory of anxiety disorders, and you can be cured of those things if you have them. Fear of flying, for example. I have friends that have gone through the treatment where they put you in a fake plane that's in a room like this, and then they slowly get you exposed to it, and then they fly with you, and so on, and you get over it. Anyway, Erica had a bona fide fear of snakes, and she, after she had graduated from Harvard, I didn't know her at the time as an undergrad, and she had gone to Bangladesh to work in a women's health development project in the deep backcountry of Bangladesh, in a place called Proshika, and she met a woman who Bemi Jelen, who was her roommate in Bangladesh, and these two young girls, fresh out of college, idealistic, were trying to help, reduce wife beating and improve the economic circumstances of women in this part of the world. Bemi was the girlfriend of my best friend from high school, who was this Iranian dude by the name of Nasrallah Sami. So Nasrallah and I went way back, was one of my oldest friends. And Bemi is there with Erica, and so Bemi had met me, and then one day she says, Erica, I just thought of the man you're going to marry. And Erica said, what the hell are you talking about? He's 10,000 miles away. He's this Greek guy called Nico. He sounds sleazy. He wants to be a doctor, and my father was a doctor, and I'm not interested in doctors. I'm going to marry a war correspondent, or like a wildlife photographer, or some action hero guy, and someone like that, not like a Greek American doctor named Nico, and. So Bemi says, he's a nice guy, just wait, I'll introduce you when we get back. And so they came back at the end of their year to Washington, D.C., where, of course, I had grown up. And so Nasi and Bemi contrived to introduce us one day. And Nasi lived in this big intergenerational Iranian household with his parents and his older sisters and their children. So there were nieces and nephews and grandparents and all these people living under this big household. And the day comes when I'm supposed to go over there, and I knew this house, and I ring the doorbell, and I open the door, and Erica, I come in that door where it says exit, and Erica's right here having some kind of spirited argument with Bemi about some feminist philosophy issue, and I take one look at her, and I was like lightning. I was like, oh my God, this woman, I'm in love with her, like just instantly. Like I was like, and later she took a bit longer, but not much longer. So I walk in, and now the 4 25-year-olds are just chatting about stuff. My mother, meanwhile, was about to die. Like, I met Erica in middle of July, so my mother was 2 months from death. I was very raw from all this experience, and so the 25-year-olds are chatting, and I'm on like my best behavior now. Like, I'm on notice. Like, I want to impress this woman, and the little cousins, Nasi's nieces and nephews, who are like 10 and 12. They were like, kind of chatting with us, and I wanted to show Erica that I'm like good father material. So like I'm like talking to the kids, and like I'm deploying all my geology knowledge. The kid was interested in rocks, and I'm like, okay, I can do this. I remember, quartz crystals and the Mohs hardness scale, and I can talk about all of this stuff. And at some point, the kids asked us to go upstairs to their room, to see their room, where they had like a little cabinet of curiosities. The little children will have a collection. And the four of us go upstairs, and Bemi and Erica are standing at the door, and Nasi and I go with the two kids to this shelf, and there's all this stuff there. And one of them was this like snake skin. And I'm like pulling up my reptile knowledge now. I'm like, how can I talk to this kid about, how snakes shed their skin, and what do we know about the Fibonacci sequence, and the tail of the skin, and I'm like pulling off the tail of the snake and the skin and all of this stuff, and I'm trying to, and I'm just about, and the kid pulls the snake skin off the shelf and is about to hand it to me, and Erica, that I had just met like 2 hours earlier, she blurts from the door, she goes, "If you touch that snake skin, you'll never touch me." I was like, yes, she likes me, like I was like, and then I was like, well, snakeskin, this is a difficult decision, I don't know what I'm going to do, and that was it, because I knew she liked me, and anyway, that's how I met Erica when I was 25, and then we fell in love very quickly, and it took us a while to get married, but that's irrelevant.
The irony is that her phobia brought you together.
Yes, exactly. Actually, well, at least it alerted me to her interest in me, which was because I'm such a dork, was not apparent to me before then. Anyway, so then during that year, I rediscovered my interest in the social sciences. I also decided that I wanted to be a research scientist, and I had come to learn something which is still true, which is that the days when you could get graduate training in medicine, and that was enough to be a researcher, had passed in the 60s. Like, you really need a PhD degree. So you need to be trained in science. And now you could be a clinician scientist. You could do clinical research if you're a professor of ophthalmology or internal medicine or infectious disease. You can do clinical studies of like drugs, for example, but you can't do like bench science or original science or discovery-based science, I would say. So I needed to get a PhD, and I didn't know what to do it in. And through a series of serendipitous events I don't think I'll go into, although there are some stories there too, I chose sociology, which is a low-status field, and was then, and it still is. I could tell you a funny Larry Stummer story. If you remind me, I'll come back to it, about who I count as a friend, Larry. But anyway, so about sociology, I can tell you later. But anyway, so I picked sociology and working with this woman, Renee Fox. This was at the University of Pennsylvania. And I went there for my PhD. I had to do my clinical training. I did my residency, my fellowship in internal medicine, and my PhD in 6 years. So I was able to double count a few of those things and get all that done. And finally, by the age of 33, I had finished my formal education. And I got my first job at the University of Chicago, which is still to this day my favorite university in the world. And I would send my children there. I would take a job there again if they offered it. It's just an astonishing university. And I went there as an assistant professor at the age of 33 in 1995. And then in 2001, I moved to Harvard, which was, well, it was fascinating to me how that decision came about, and we can talk about that if you want to. But that was partly driven by the fact that if there was any place that I would have left Chicago for, it would have been Harvard. And my kids were the right age, and they made me an offer I couldn't refuse, basically. And I look back on that, and I'm not 100% sure. I mean, that led to other serendipity where I ran into, well, I should do some of my intellectual autobiography. While I was at Chicago, I was taking care of hospice patients because I was a hospice doctor. And in my lab, I was studying death-related phenomena. So I was studying the care of the terminally ill. I was studying optimal performance of ICUs. I was optimal end-of-life care. I was studying determinants of hospice care. I was studying the widowhood effect, which is dying of a broken heart or the increased probability of the recently bereaved to die. And I was getting depressed. And my wife was like, you need to study something else. And I basically decided to study marriage. And that's how I started. Exactly. But marriage was a big step up from studying death. And I started studying exactly taxes. Yes, exactly. There's this old joke. A guy says goes into the doctor and he's terminally ill and he's dying, and the doctor examines him and then says, I have some bad news. And the patient says, what is it? And he goes, well, you're going to die in 6 months. And the patient says, oh my God, doctor, it's awful. What should I do? And he says, well, get married and move to Cleveland. And the patient says, why? And he goes, well, you'll only live 6 months, but it'll feel like 20 years. Anyway, it's a stupid old joke, but this is a joke that hospice doctors tell. Anyway, actually another joke that hospice doctors tell is, actually this is hospice nurses tell this joke. What's the function of nails in a coffin? To keep the doctors from administering more chemotherapy.
Oh, God.
Anyway, this is old stuff I'm pulling out. So, but I was studying the widowhood effect, and this was actually to change my life because in the 1990s, I had this experience, I talk about this in one of my TED Talks, where I was taking care of this old woman who was dying of dementia, and she was being cared for by her daughter. And I had this sort of sudden realization that the widowhood effect, which is the fact that death spreads from me to you, to my spouse, actually is a simple case of a much broader and more complex phenomena, that these effects were not limited to death, and they weren't limited to dyads, that you could have broader spreading processes in networks. And that totally changed my life. But then I went to Harvard, and I was casting about for a way to study this more generally, and this led me to the Framingham Heart Study, and then led me to the 2007 paper we did on obesity, which also changed my life. And I can tell you about that if you're interested. And then I was at Harvard from 2001. I arrived, my first day of work was 9/11, which there's also some interesting stories there. And then I was there for 12 years till 2013, when I was having a real hard time getting Harvard to give me the resources I needed for the kind of science I wanted to do. And to make the very long story short, Yale made me an offer I couldn't refuse to give me the resources I needed. I needed wet lab space. I needed different kinds of resources than I was getting at Harvard. So I made the fateful decision to move to Yale. And we came with a big heart and with a real interest, both me and my wife, and persuaded that we could make a difference at this institution and help advance its science, help advance its values. We moved in a house. We bought a house in Hamden. I had been the master at Forsheimer House, one of the houses at Harvard similar to our colleges here. My wife and I had served there and liked it, being masters. And Peter Salovey offered us to be masters here. This is not widely known. Offered us, in fact, it's not known by anyone. We were offered to be masters when we moved, and we said, no, we'd done that. We didn't want to do it. And then the next year, he said, would you like to be masters? I think there was an opening at Morse. And we said no. And then third year, he said, okay, we have 4 openings. Could you please help us out? You'd be great candidates to be masters at Silliman. And my wife and I finally relented. And we had other things going on in our own life. The house that we had in Hamden wasn't exactly to our liking. We said, why don't we try it? We'd done it before, which was a really bad mistake, as it turned out. Couldn't have told. The other thing, which comes back to friendship, which I did not factor in, it was so stupid of me, and I'm going to mention this because it's important. I had been at Harvard for 12 years. Some of the people that I met there I had known from before, from 20 years earlier or whatever it was. I had real friends at Harvard, grown men, mostly men, some women, who were my friends, who knew my character, who could vouch for me. The thing that happened in 2015 could never have happened at Harvard, because I would have had 100, at least 50 people that would have come out in public and said, what the hell is going on here? This guy is a good guy, you misunderstand, etc. But when I was at Yale, I was a new person, which is also typical of these kinds of ostracism events, where we have to cast out someone from our community in order to solidify our own community. My wife had to be cast out. That's what was going on then, right? She had to be demonized. They had to burn the witch at the stake, which is the other thing that enraged me about that whole thing, is they weren't just coming after me, they were coming after Erica. My testosterone was through the roof. To self-regulate in that situation when they are, they did things, the Yale students, this is not widely known. This is not known at all as far as I know. They photoshopped pictures of Erica on pornographic images, and they Yale students and circulated them in the courtyard. Can you fucking believe that? Just extraordinary. And I was in the courtyard one day.
Can you say what she did? I don't know if everyone knows.
Oh, never mind. Never mind. She wrote an email. There was
actually,
I think it's
I didn't want to interrupt you, but I think it's good because you started off by mentioning the fact that it's a part of your achievements. We don't know the extent to which people think of you in that context. Is there anybody in this room that does not know what we're talking about when we talk about the affair? Raise your hand if you don't know what we're talking about.
All right, very briefly, very briefly, over the 5 or 10 years prior to 2015, there had been a growing sort of DEI-led movement with cautions about Halloween costumes. So in a way to signal an open commitment to minorities, progressively there had been, instead of actually doing the work of making people feel welcome, there was all this like symbolic, performative kind of stuff, one of which was annual notifications to students that they shouldn't wear offensive Halloween costumes, reminding Yale students not to wear blackface or yellow face or red face or sombreros. There's a long list of stuff. And in fact, this had been happening all around the country, and there was in fact, a New York Times article about it. Yet again, Halloween costume advice is coming out. And my wife had been teaching a class called The Concept of a Problem Child about how kids have been problematized, autistic kids and poor kids and pregnant kids, and she'd been teaching this wonderful class, and her students said, this is crazy, it's infantilizing. We got this directive from a group of 13 or 14 Yale administrators that was sent to all of Yale students, warning them with a link to recommended and non-recommended costumes, which if the costumes were so triggering, why were they sending photographs of non-permissible costumes to all the students on the whole campus? And my wife, encouraged by her students who said this is crazy, and encouraged by the broader conversation I was having in our country, misread, we were new to the community, we misread what kind of community we were a part of. We thought we were a community where people understood our good intentions and where facts and reason were ascendant. And she wrote an email, went viral, millions of people read it. If we had known it, we would have put a little link for a QR code or something on it. And it's now been archived. These episodes have been described in something like 30 nonfiction books. And now there was just a session at Harvard where these events were seen as sentinel events. Like what happened to us in 2015 is now in retrospect seen as a marker of a radical shift in attitudes in our society amongst college students. So my wife wrote, just fired off like an email saying, many people, I understand where this letter is coming from. It's motivated by good intentions, but we should ask, I believe, Erica said to our students at Yale, whether you students who are 18 to 22-year-old students really want adults telling you what to wear. I mean, aren't you old enough to sort this out for yourselves and to self-regulate and to talk to each other? Like, how do I know if someone that had been sexually abused by a Catholic priest had their costume be like someone wearing a collar and holding a baby and they painted the penis of the baby red and this was their costume because they were protesting? How can I then come and say I'm offended by this costume and it should be prohibited? On what grounds? You don't know what I'm doing. Am I mocking religion? Am I making a political statement? What is happening in that situation? Why can't we talk to each other? You're students, you're adults, you're Yale. Well, the shit hit the fan, and thousands of people signed letters denouncing my wife. They said that we should give advance warning before she came to the dining hall because they didn't want to be in the same room with her. Erica. I mean, they said this about Erica, which is insane if you knew Erica. Completely insane. I mean, this woman had done more good in the world than any of these little undergraduates, let alone all of the faculty that lined up, with their own agendas. So, I was having English professors lecturing me about structural racism. I'm like, I worked on the south side of Chicago for 6 years, taking care of minority patients who were dying in their own homes. What the hell are you telling me about redressing inequities? What have you done? You've written some essays using jargon, and I've actually done shit, I've been done original research about, how social factors affect health. I've cared for people, I've worked in hospitals. I've saved people's lives. Have you saved anyone's life? Anyway, so they came for her, and it was a completely ridiculous situation. And then there was a moment, like 2 weeks later, where the students had assembled to protest us in the Silliman courtyard, and I had just finished an interview with a reporter. And Erica was away. I don't know where she was. And I was in this baronial Silliman master's house, and which is baronial and has 16 bedrooms and 12 bathrooms. It's an extraordinary house, a beautiful library on the first floor. And the students were out in the courtyard, and I felt like Marie Antoinette. Like I'm in they're out there, and I'm sitting in this baronial house, and I have to decide what to do. And I'm sitting there thinking, well, first of all, it felt unmanly, or I don't know what, unwomanly, unmanly in the stereotypic sense, like unbrave, like it felt weak to sit there in the courtyard and not go talk to the students. Plus it's inconsistent with my principles, which is we talk about things. And it felt disrespectful to the students who were protesting. It turned out they were protesting me, but they were making a protest, which I should dignify and honor, I thought. So I stepped out of my house, which was so stupid. And I went into the courtyard, and then I was surrounded by 150 students for about 2.5 hours. And by sheer serendipity, I had done a series of speakers that year. I had tried to up the intellectual game at Silliman by having famous people come and speak in the Silliman speaker series. And we had at the beginning of the year, we had an African-American historian from MIT that came and spoke to the students. He wrote a book called Ebony and Ivy, talking about the history of racism in our elite institutions. So I had that guy. I had David Simon, who wrote The Wire, is a fantastic screenwriter, come and talk about screenwriting in Hollywood, and a bunch of other people that I knew come and speak. And we had invited Greg Lukianoff, who's now the head of FIRE, who at the time had not yet written The Coddling of... Oh yeah, he had written The Coddling of the American Mind, the essay, not the book. Okay. And we had invited Greg to speak. And I'm out in the courtyard, and that day, actually Greg had been invited, I think, by the Buckley program, and and I knew Greg because he had spoken at Harvard without incident, 4 years earlier, and I had invited Greg to come speak, and Greg was going to stay in the guest house at Silliman, and he arrived with his luggage and was walking through the courtyard, escorted by someone to get to his residence, and stumbles on this scene where I'm surrounded by these people and takes out his camera and starts videotaping it. And he took 4 one-minute clips. Meanwhile, there were about 20 cameras in that mob, and about an hour and a half of footage was released by multiple students, just to be clear. But Greg's clip went viral, and the students thought that somehow I had engineered this, that like I had contrived this, or it was crazy, like paranoid thinking. It was a total serendipity. I mean, Greg had been invited like 6 months earlier, and I could not organize the students to somehow acquire some kind of notoriety. It was crazy. And so this video went viral, and I just kept my cool in the courtyard. And then one of the students came up close to me and tried to threaten me, and I'm like thinking, okay, Shotokan is like, what?
She almost hit you.
No, that was another woman. There was a young man that came up to me and was nose to nose with me, and I was thinking about what to do. And one of my martial arts naive friends, one of these women I was speaking to afterwards, she goes like, well, you should have just sat down. And I'm like, no. It is a bad idea to sit down when you're surrounded by a lot of angry people. You don't want to be low to the ground because a kick to the head can kill you. Anyway, so that's the viral. That's what happened. That was the episode. And my wife's email was eminently reasonable, and it has become a symbol of a certain shift in our society, which we now look back on and can see. But at the time, it was really hard to cope with that, and we decided we were not going to resign in the middle of it. But over the course of the months afterwards, we decided that it would have taken too much of our lives to do a repair of the relationships with the students, especially since we had no support at all from the administration. Like, there was no truth and reconciliation. This was Yale's big mistake. And one of the things that led to another 10 years of crap is we had no Truth and Reconciliation Commission, right? We had no honest accounting of what actually happened and where the limits were transgressed and where they were not. Because there are rules on the books that were transgressed and nothing was done about them.
For the record, we have a president Peter was president then?
Yes.
Yeah. We have a president who's weak.
Yes.
And has no spine.
Yes,
and couldn't stand up for any principle.
Yeah, I think that's correct.
We've seen it through the last 10 years. Who came after Richard Levin, who did amazing things and revolutionized the city and the university. It's a pattern that we've seen with President Salve, and it's the reason we are where we are today. Because I think we've moved laterally for 10 years. Absolutely, and he's gone sideways. The university's gone sideways, if not south. And if he would have had the stamina and the respect and the dignity and the intelligence to stand up then, at that seminal moment in Yale history, the worst moment of chutzpah probably in higher education in America. I remember Toby coming home that night and saying, the mere chutzpah, if that was my daughter, Toby, why don't you just say it the way you said it? Said it then.
Brought her home and grounded her for a year for talking to her.
Yeah.
Talk to a professor with that type
She
of...
got applauded, she got awarded.
She won the award.
Well, a bunch of
And so we have a president and therefore a culture top down here in the administration by the faculty to tolerate that type of chutzpah for a 19 or 20-year-old girl to talk to a professor who's dedicated your life to saving people, and your wife, to saving people's lives every single day of your life and educating people, is the reason why higher education, frankly, is where it is today. Those are the moments when they could have stood up. And I told it to Peter, and I sent him the article, Toby, in that magazine that girl in Seattle had written, The Alum. And I finally got it to her. I waited. I shouldn't have waited maybe, but I waited, and then I sent it to him. Somebody who wrote, who exposed the whole real story there. And back and forth, and it's like that today. It's the same thing with what happened on October 7th. With the
yeah, I think
just play the politics, and let it be. And when you see evil in front of you, and not to call it out and to make a statement about it, is just—it's terrible, terrible, terrible. It's precedent for setting.
What was very, just as a bystander, but somebody who saw the video, and I was so upset for you and your wife, and as a parent, to see the reaction to young people behaving this way and being applauded and being coddled, frankly. And you have the president who speaks all about emotional intelligence and no application here, but not just the rest of the faculty. Where is the faculty?
yes.
And this is why we are where we are today in general. But that was a moment that was such a critical moment that I refer back to all the time, which is why I say you're a legend. And I would love to meet Erica one day, because it was such a shocking moment of betrayal in so many ways, and almost like a turnover of what it means to educate. What you and your wife were trying to do.
Yes, we were trying to do that, but what's fascinating. Thank you for both of you for saying those things that you said. But if I can be dispassionate about it, what amazed me about those events. Let me talk about the Trent Colbert thing, and then I'll come back to our thing. Trent Colbert would have been such a soft pitch, so easy to defend him. He's half Native American.
Wait, some people don't even know the Trent story either. So it's funny how fast time moves on this campus.
Oh, for God's sakes!
Trap House.
Trent Colbert was Trent Colbert.
Does everybody know the Trap House?
Trent Colbert. He's a Yale law student. He's in the Federalist Society. And to be very clear, I'm left of center politically, but I have friends all over the spectrum. I enjoy arguing with my conservative friends. I have libertarian friends. I have one libertarian friend in particular who drives me crazy, but I adore him. He's one of my three closest friends, and the man is utterly brilliant. One of the smartest people I've ever met, and his views are just, but they give me pause. I'm like, God, if Adam thinks this, gee, I may be wrong, Anyway.
Trent, Native American.
Half Native American guy from the reservation, I believe, literally, politically concerned. No, not that. No, okay, I thought he was. Okay.
But definitely looks Native American. You see him, yes.
Yes, Trent definitely does.
Not to.
Yeah.
That's all right.
He's also not half.
No, I think he's half. I think he's.
Not. I know him personally.
Okay.
His mother is Asian.
Uh-huh.
His father is like half.
So he's a quarter then.
He's a quarter. I'm just saying.
Okay.
Better than
all right.
Elizabeth Warren.
Okay. So actually, I have to say, in my family, my wife's maiden name is Zuckerman, and in my family, my wife will often correct. I'll be telling a story, and I'll be like, in 1987 we did this, and she's like, no, actually it was 1986, And I call these annoying Zuckerman accuracies, where they kind of interrupt and they correct the thing that says not actually half, he's like a quarter. Okay, no, hold on, I'm teasing you. Let me finish.
Quite important.
Yeah, well, it's a little important that he's Native American. He was part of the Native American group and whatever.
What was most important is that he was visibly someone who wasn't white.
Not white,
which
exactly.
Is what
Yeah.
people actually care
Okay,
about.
I'll come back to the point in a moment. But anyway, and then I was telling this story to another close friend of mine, Dan Gilbert, about AZAs, annoying Zuckerman accuracy. He goes, oh my God, in our household we call these pointless spousal corrections, PSCs. Anyway, I'm teasing you. I'm taking a liberty. Please don't take it personally. Anyway, so Trent Colbert was some fraction Native American, was a part of the Native American community here, was in the Federalist Society, wants to organize with his friends some kind of party, sends out an invitation in which he uses some sort of childish expressions like we're going to have some basic bitch like snacks and we're going to get some fried chicken from a trap house. We're going to have a trap house party, which apparently is a term a slang word which originates from like a drug-using cocaine house, but actually had entered our language and was more widely used, and you can look it up on whatever. And then the students, some minority students, erupt and think that he's this awful racist person and that they were so threatened by this and so on. And you can correct me and get the facts, give the fact pattern better. But the gist of it was, he then gets called before some of the DEI bureaucrats at the law school, and they have a pre-formed apology note for him, a pre-written apology note, which they encourage him to sign because something might otherwise happen bad to his career. I mean, it was like straight out of,
1984.
yeah, it was just extraordinary. The fact pattern is extraordinary. And the reason I mention this particular fact pattern is because the dean of the law school, this was about the easiest case. It was like such a soft pitch. Like you could have used this fact, you didn't have like some white guy with Nazi paraphernalia, right? You didn't have like a hard case of free expression to defend. This was like a pretty easy case that you could come to the defense of with an appealing defendant, that I think you could have won this case. But she didn't do that. And I think the same sort of situation, please, you're wincing. You want to add to the fact pattern? Are you sure?
And anybody who knows him knows he's the furthest thing from a racist. He's the furthest.
Yeah.
I mean,
So
it's kind of the world.
And if you look at what happened with Jenny Martinez, with the shout down of that conservative judge who I don't like, she handled it. That law school dean handled it much better. Her challenge. And I think anyway, the reason I mention it is that I think we would have been easy to defend. I think my wife's email was benign. I think it was well intentioned. It would have been easy to explain some misunderstandings. We were left of center politically. We weren't even, not that it should have mattered, but we weren't. And we had previously been beloved of the students. My wife had demand for her classes far exceeded supply. There were hundreds of students. She was doubling and tripling her course offerings because so many students wanted to take her. She had the best ratings in Yale College as a teacher, et cetera, et cetera. We would have been easy to defend, but we were not defended because I think the community needed an ostracism. They needed someone to be cast out, and I would be damned if they were going to have my wife for that purpose, candidly. So anyway, that's that whole episode. But that's enough on that, unless you have burning details, and then we could go back to science. Or biography, yeah.
Oh, if it's on this, you don't
That's fine. No, a couple more. Yeah, go on.
I mean, I was a freshman on campus when this happened.
Oh, is that
and
right?
So, yeah, and then I come back from my PhD now, so my sort of institutional memory of Yale, it begins with
Those
what come before and then it happens. And when I was here, of course, there were 3 totemic linguistic transformations that happened from 2015 on, which is, of course, Master became head, Calhoun became Hopper, and freshman became first year.
Yeah.
And these 3 battles, which were battles, I think, before, I somehow got wound up with your incidents in some ways. And it became this, I remember the March of Resistance. It was just incredible. The amount of, the furious behavior everywhere was a sight to behold. At the time, though, students still were interestingly provocative, I found, for the next several years afterwards. There were still loads of students who found it ridiculous and would write such things in the paper, and there would be those sorts of... So I just wonder, coming back, what I've noticed in a major way, and this is what I want to hear your perspective on, especially knowing that you've just helped to found the faculty at Yale initiative, that sort of thing, but it seems that students are much more fearful. That seems to be the biggest change, and I wonder how much you think it relates to these events that go back, and they seem very quiet.
It's very hard for me because I've devoted my life to teaching young people. I love kids these days. And I want to be the last person that says, oh, kids these days are really bad, or whatever. There's jokes, Socrates writes about kids these days don't respect their elders. There's actually interesting psychology about this. My friend Dan Gilbert published a study of why everyone thinks kids these days are so bad, and yet there's no evidence that morality is declining. Just every generation thinks that kids these days are so bad. So I refuse to think ill of kids these days. I just don't want to. And yet, kids these days, it's unbelievable. Like I see it in my classroom. They're afraid to speak. I remember when I was at Yale, we would argue with our roommates. We would go to the dining hall. We would have political arguments with people, and for fun. We would argue about stuff. They don't do that anymore. They just don't. it's very weird to me. So I don't know what to make of that. I see it in my classroom. I have to really work hard to encourage my students to talk. And I talk to my colleagues who are experienced master teachers, many of them, and they describe the same thing. They describe extraordinary efforts they have to make to extract from the students and to train them. One of the tricks my wife used to use, which I use, you guys might want to use, a great trick. So someone says something that, is like forbidden, let's say, in the classroom. Instead of giving kids a dichotomous choice, do you agree or disagree? Say, well, who agrees, 80% with what Susie just said? Nobody raised it. Who agrees 50% with Susie said? One person. Who agrees 20% with Susie? 4 people. Who agrees 10%? Maybe she's a little bit right, Susie. And so when you give people that gradation, then it allows them to have a bit of a conversation. When you say, well, what is it about the 10% that you agree with Susie? And what do you disagree with? And you can then cultivate. But the amount of work that's required with this crop of kids these days is just incredible. And I see it in my public health class, where there are a lot of fraught topics. To what extent, for example, do doctors act with racial animus, the racist animus? Is it and there's mixed evidence. There's much evidence that doctors act in a racist fashion when they're assigning, for example, expensive treatments. And there's much evidence against it. And it's hard to know, actually, what the truth is. Both are believable as far as I'm concerned. To believe that there's this vast racist conspiracy among some of the most beneficent people in our society who are setting out to care for people is pretty hard. On the other hand, there's a lot of evidence that, so it's difficult. So I show the kids all the evidence. I'm saying, I don't know what to think about this. And so on.
We're going to go with
Just one more question about this. I was wondering if you're familiar with the theory of Nassim Taleb's theory. It's called intolerant minority. By no means he means racial minority. He just means that there's an ideological minority in certain institutions that can basically capture.
Yeah, his famous example of the kosher lemonade, right?
I did the London example.
Yeah.
That I think has been. That can capture what? That can just capture the institution well against.
So I don't know the London example. The example I know
he talks about a halal food in London or something.
Yeah, so and he goes like, now you have this kosher label on products which aren't even remotely non-kosher, like gluten-free, exactly.
And I was wondering if you sense that maybe that's what's going on at a Harvard or a Yale, because I was an undergrad at Harvard, and my experience was that.
Which house were you in?
Dunster. And my experience was that these people who are extremely vocal in their beliefs are really a minority of students, yet they have an outsized influence.
Yes,
and the word, I'm sorry, I don't want to interrupt. I think the word we're talking about is the hijacking. It's literally a hijacking. But
no, I was just going to say, I think here I encourage people to be braver, to speak up. Even if the people opposed to this minority are not the majority, there are still a goodly minority. 40% of people probably don't hold these views at least. So how much bravery is required? And I think part of the reason is they have an auto da fe, right? They burn someone at the stake to get everyone else in line, just like the Chinese Communist Party and the Cultural Revolution, right? It is, or like Sun Tzu writes, when he gets the prince's harem in order by executing the first one. I think it's extremely effective. People look at what happens to, let's say, people who are denounced in this fashion, and they're like, I don't want that. And so it just encourages silence. Incidentally, it's also why they tend to police people that are on the boundary or within the community, right? Like if they had gone after like some far-right conservative, like these people are nuts, I don't care, there's nothing to be done. That's not who you're policing. You're policing the people like at the boundary. So anyway, I think these behaviors are widely described. I found during that year, I reread a bunch of things. The first thing I reread was Viktor Frankl's Man's Search for Meaning, which I read every 10 years. I read 3 books every 10 years. I read the Iliad. Who is the hero in the Iliad? Who knows? Who's the hero in the Iliad?
The Rage?
Who thinks it's Achilles?
That's Cassandra.
No, it's not Cassandra. Who thinks Achilles is the hero? No, it's Hector, the Trojan prince. It's Hector who's the hero of Achilles, not the Greek, the Trojan, who valiantly struggles to save his city, with a ne'er-do-well sibling who kidnapped this Greek princess and brought her back and brought ruin, with an elderly father, with his sister Cassandra who told the truth but nobody believed, with the Greeks at bay, trying to break down his walls, fighting and fighting and fighting knowing that he's doomed, right? That his beloved wife Andromache would be put to death and taken as a slave, that Astiniax, his son, would be thrown from the ramparts. Hector is the real hero. So I reread the Iliad, I reread The Last Days of Socrates, which is unbelievable, and Viktor Frankl's Man's Search for Meaning. So I reread it that year, and it's just extraordinary if you haven't read it. I mean, it's just, you should all read it. It's unbelievable how he could, the realizations he came to in the concentration camp. After his wife, either his wife was pregnant or had just delivered a baby, his first wife, they were put to death. And then he survives in this extraordinary way and returns to Austria, to Vienna, and forgives the people that had not helped him or denounced him. Unbelievable. Actually, the volume I have of Man's Search for Meaning has, he wrote like these, within 10 days of the release from the concentration camp, he wrote this book. It's about 50 or 60 pages. The volume I have has his correspondence afterwards when he sets up this logotherapy institute in Vienna with Viennese, and it's just incredible. So I reread those things, and I reread the Bacchae. You know what I'm talking about. Yeah. Well, a bunch of teenage girls like rip someone to shreds, and
Don't forget.
What?
His mother too.
Yeah.
And then she carries his hand.
Yes, that's right. Yes.
Every wonderful head of a line, and then
Yeah.
dad is like, are you?
Yes.
I have some bad news.
Bad Priest, it's your son. That's right, the Bacchae. And then last I reread Nelson Mandela's autobiography.
Yeah.
Long Walk to Freedom.
Yes. And I'm thinking, my problems are fucking trivial. I mean, they're really trivial by comparison to Viktor Frankl and Nelson Mandela and Socrates, and it was really helpful, right? I mean, it was hugely helpful. And there's a lot of wisdom in these things. Because my point I'm making here is, with the allusions to the Chinese Communist Party, is that there's nothing new under the sun. All of the things we are seeing, all of the crazy ideological commitments, the mob mentality, the fear, the inability to stand, like there was a conservative writer in England who wrote a nice essay. I don't particularly agree with this guy, and I'm blocking on his name. I don't know, it was Murray. Murray's pretty smart. No, I can't remember who it was. He wrote an article about ostracism. You go like, okay, look, he says, you don't have to be very brave. You don't have to oppose all this stuff, but at least defend your friends. He basically says, like, if at least the people who are friends of the people who are being victims of this type of behavior spoke up, that you can do that. You can at least do that. Talking about how we started today. So anyway, so there's nothing new under the sun. All of these phenomena are old, ancient phenomena. Have been studied scientifically, been studied philosophically, been studied religiously. I didn't read the book of Job again, actually. That would have been a bit much. Yeah, exactly. But anyway, so I don't know. So I don't know how I got onto Viktor Frankl. But yeah.
Pass the mic down.
Can we ask about like love and friendship now?
Yes.
Okay, cool.
Please.
So, two quick ones. The first, distinguish between, mostly just elaborate on like what love at first sight actually means from a like scientific standpoint, and if that's real, and if so, like what does it mean for that to be real, and how is that different from like liking someone at first sight? And then related to that, for hypothetical but like not at all reasons, so like how often does love at first sight like turn into a relationship? Do you know that statistic?
Well, if it's mutual, it's a lot. I'm talking about love at first sight that's reciprocated, not the kind of infatuation you and I may have had in high school, where we, in college or medical school, where I was in love with this woman and she had no idea who the hell I was. That was not an uncommon experience. I have a kind of a romantic. I'm actually a hopeless romantic, honestly, completely pathetically hopeless.
Well,
romantic.
but you're married.
Yeah.
Now I am. Yes.
See,
No.
I'm
Since
not.
then.
See, my generation's not getting married.
Yes, I know that, and also not having sex, which is fascinating to
yeah.
me. It's just incredible to me. Yeah, well, some people think it's porn. Yeah, it's a bunch of things. It's a failure to assume adult roles. You guys are also not getting your driver's licenses. You're not, you're not getting married. You're not having sex. You're delaying entry into the job market. I mean, not you personally, but there's like a lot of indicators.
I actually think it's the not getting married. And Toby may have better insight to this. I think a lot of it is also the inhibition. Because our communication is so false today, and we're not being honest.
Yeah.
we're guarded, much more guarded. And so we're not letting our guard down, we're not being vulnerable,
Yeah.
we're not being, our relationships
Are thinner.
are thinner and they're
Kids
less,
these days.
less authentic, and therefore everybody's on guard. And so
Yeah.
how could you possibly be intimate
Yes.
with a person from
Yes.
with the, frankly,
Yes.
at the onset a stranger? But how could you get intimate if you can't even communicate?
Yes, I agree with it.
Honestly, you can't even make a joke anymore.
Yeah.
You can't kibitz anymore.
Yeah.
You can't and flirt. I mean,
Flirting is very dangerous.
Yeah,
I told
so
my
if you
sons when they
can't
went to
have-
college, I said, you're going to date men and women at other universities,
Yeah.
not at your
Yeah,
own.
easier, right?
Yes.
And so it's terrible. I mean, so people today, and I see it in the interaction, you really need to almost break the ice to just let us be people and
Yes.
joke and be honest and,
Yeah.
and insult each other and get
Yeah,
it
yeah.
back. And,
Yeah.
and it is a reflection of that deeper cultural destruction, essentially, where this lie, the pervasive lies, have basically hijacked society, and so there's so much distancing, and it's subconscious, and it's reflecting. It's not the cause; it's the symptom. It's the fact. Of course, people aren't getting married and having sex because people aren't even interacting with other people the way normal human beings should be interacting and building real relationships. Because everybody's worried about what the board's going to say, what the leadership's going to say, what the rules are.
Yeah, I'm with you.
The rules are to.
So it depends on reciprocate. Reciprocate has a high predicted probability of successful relationship, right? You fall in love, she falls in love with you, or he, it's like mutual, it's kismet, you get it, you're off to the races. If it's unilateral, then it's not very successful.
What percentage, not successful?
I don't know the answer. I don't know the answer. You would know if you were in love with someone, if you fell in love with them at love at first sight, and I don't know, you may have never had the experience where you're sitting in a train and you strike up a conversation and you just find yourself falling in love. Oh, I made a note to mention this. One of the things that's very interesting about both friendship and affection and sexual or romantic attraction is, and obviously there's a difference between lust and love, big difference, is these sort of liminal states or these transitory states that where our inhibitions are reduced. So, for example, you probably all had this experience of going away when you first arrived at Yale in freshman year. Remember the first 3 weeks, and the Iron Curtain typically comes down at the third week. Everyone's very friendly. You sit down with strangers, you strike up a conversation, right? And it's not weird. Oh, what's your name? Hi, where are you from? Tell me more about that. You just immediately are talking. You get close to them, the whole 9 yards. And then after 3 weeks, then you have your friends, and that's it, and you don't interact. And then it's weird. If someone is like this friendly with you, you're like, who is this creep that is acting? A behavior that a few minutes ago. Same with cruises. When people go on cruises, they're like, oh, we love each other. We're going to get back together when the cruise is over. And of course, they never do. You never go to the city or wherever. Or in Canterbury Tale, Canterbury Tales, when they're going on a pilgrimage, right? They all become very friendly. One that the prayer with the shorter sota, the drocht of Mars, it perse to the rota. And bade de brivein, swishly cour, etc., etc. I could do the whole 18 lines. But anyway, then longen folk to go on pilgrimages. That's when people want to go on pilgrimages. All of these are structural moments when the guard is down and people can form these things. And this is why this plus engaging in physical activity. So physical activity releases a lot of hormones that your potential partner confuses with you. So if you go running with someone, they have these endorphin rush, and actually it's from the running, but they think, oh, you're great. And you can also do this with fear. There's a very famous experiment that was done where this guy asks women, it was a heterosexual situation, a guy asked women out on dates, and he asked the women out, random women, strangers to him, literally, hi, how are you? My name's Bob. Would you like to see me tonight for dinner? And he asked them at the base of a bridge and at the peak of the bridge, like on the top. And then when the number of women who said yes to his proposal for a date when on the peak of the bridge was like 5 times higher. Because they're a little anxious when you get to the top of the bridge and you confuse that heightened arousal, which is just fear. You think, oh, this is an interesting person.
Going on a run works?
Yeah, running is really good. So any athletic activity or any kind of sporty activity or activity in nature, these are very effective.
So running in nature
is even better.
Pass the mic around.
Yeah, but hold on. Let me just finish.
Yeah.
So answer the question. So the bilateral is important. So unilateral, it doesn't count. And then you asked me about, and love at first sight is, I think, objectively different. Oh, and it has not, to my knowledge, nobody has ever been able to contrive circumstances where they could collect a large enough sample of love at first sight and non-love at first sight to compare the physiology of it. So we just know people's descriptions, like how people feel and what they describe. We have a very big literature on this, not just like the poets writing, but we have like testimony from people saying, what they felt like. And I discuss this in Blueprint. I have 2 chapters on love, and like at first sight, of course, is a much more common experience and has a completely different basis. I didn't get into this earlier, like why it's to our advantage to have friends. And there's a very famous article by John Tooby and Lida Cosmides called the Banker's Paradox, which is there's this very funny observation that bankers don't want to lend you money when you need it. Bankers only want to lend you money when you don't need it. Yeah. Well, how the hell are they bankers then? Like, how does that work exactly? So someone who really desperately needs money is not a good security risk. You don't want to lend them money. Instead, I'm going to offer money to people who don't need it, and that's who I should give it to. So what they argue is that friendship, so that our ancestral environment was full of dangerous situations in which another person, through the application of something that was low risk to them, could be a huge payoff to us. And the example that they use is you're drowning in a river, and they can just lower the branch. The person on the shore can lower the branch and help you out of the river and save your life, which is something a friend of yours would do in a moment, and it would be very fitness enhancing to you. So the argument is that our ancestral environment was full of these situations in which we faced grave peril, but which a little effort by somebody who cared about us, who we could maybe eventually reciprocate that in an asymmetric way. So the thing you have to understand about your friendship is, if I come to you and I say, do me this favor, and tomorrow I'll do you this other favor, is that how friends speak to each other? No, not at all. That's the tit for tat. Yeah, that's a transaction. That's a market economy. That's the opposite of friendship. What a friend does is say, I could use a favor. And you're like, sure, right? And it's unstated. You might or might not, like in The Godfather. The day may come or it may not come when I will ask you, So a favor. And that's what friends do to each other. And it's disjunct in time and it's disjunct in nature. You might lend your friend an apartment while you're away, and they might later on, introduce you to a girlfriend or something. In other words, they're not commensurate. The goods you exchange with your friends are completely not. It's not a transaction. And yes, it's asymmetric in time and nature. And so the argument that Tooby and Cosmides make is that, and this is discussed in Blueprint, is that the evolution of friendship has to do with the provision of these types of goods. That if an institution could have evolved that would allow us as a species to have these advantages, we would do it. And so that's their argument. And there's evidence for that argument, and I review it in the book.